We're almost done with the reveals for set 2, but before we leave this set behind, we've got some amazing new tools for Baromagnes, as well as the initial support wave for the new encounter boss units in this penultimate reveal week. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and this is your weekly roundup where we take a look at all the new cards that were revealed for the Card of the Day reveals. And this week, the support was very focused because for most nations, both new cards that they revealed were specifically tailored to one of the two main archetypes. However, for Dragon Empire and for Cater Sanctuary, we see some interesting new cards that directly support the Dragonic Overlord build, as well as the Phantom Blaster Dragon new encounter build, or encounter cards, or whatever you want to call them. So without any further ado, let's jump straight into these cards and see what these last couple of reveals will mean for the 5 great nations in set 2 Brush of the Legends, or Brush with the Legends. So we start with the reveals on Monday, and those were the reveals for Brandgate, and Brandgate's reveals were supporting the Cardinal Deus Orifice build. And first off, we have this new rare grade 1 Cardinal Prima Ecolpa. And Ecolpa has the ability on a Rearguard Circle, when this unit attacks or boosts, if your world is in Abyssal Dark Knight, cost, retire a Shadow Army token and counter charge 1. I do like this skill a lot, because this allows you to generate a lot of resources for free turn after turn after turn, as there are 2 ways for you to generate Shadow Army token. One is with the new grade 2 World Order, which allows you to generate a token on turn 2 for 1 counterblast, which means if you then sacrifice this same token the next turn, because you need to be in Abyssal Dark Knight and the earliest that currently is available is on turn 3, if you then immediately sack the token, you refund that same counterblast. Thus, if you only got 1 damage of your opponent, can then suddenly turn that 1 token potentially into 3 tokens. The only issue, however, is that it will take another turn to gain this resource or to use this resource because it's a battle phase skill, so there might be some issues to get immediate value. But if the game goes on a bit longer, then you can actually generate a lot of value out of these grade 1s, because keep in mind, your Orifice generates 3 tokens for 2 counterblasts. So if you can sacrifice those same 3 tokens, you can generate 3 counterblasts, thus generating more resources than you actually are sinking into them. Now, it can be a bit too slow, but these 1 or 2 points of counter charges that you can generate through the game can actually help you to do some other skills that you might not have the counterblast for, like your defensive skills. So I do like this card that it doesn't cost you anything besides the token that are somewhat free if you then refund it for the same cost that you generate them. Now for the second support card, we got another grade 1, this time a common, in the likes of Cardinal, Prima, Altepo. And Altepo has the ability, although when this unit is put on the Guardian Circle, if your world is in Dark Knight, Soul Charge 1, if it's in Abyssal Dark Knight, Soul Charge 2. So it's trying to mimic what G-Guardians to some extent did for certain nations or certain clans, like Genesis for example, that gives you soul during your opponent's turn. The only issue that I have with this card is that it doesn't really do anything besides just putting it on the Guardian Circle, so you cannot use it on the Rearguard Circle, meaning it's very limited in how you want to play it. But the soul charge is nice. However, I do see there's more potential in this particular card because it's placed in Orifice if it was placed in any other nation. The reason for that is that Orifice doesn't really need to call most of its cards to the field, and most of the cards in your hand are going to be used for defensive purposes, as you can populate the board with tokens anyways, or specific units that can utilize the tokens, like the grade 1 we just talked about, or other cards that have been introduced in this set. Meaning, the most likely place that this card will be placed onto the field is the Guardian Circle, and then gaining more value off of the fact that you guard with it is actually pretty nice. Now, so far, I don't really think that Orifice is using Soul all that much, but if there's gonna be a situation where it's gonna rely more and more on Soul, this could be a nice card for Orifice to have access to, as it does synergize nicely with the playstyle of the deck. Now, if we move over to the Tuesday reveals, we see Cater Sanctuary, and for Cater Sanctuary, we first see a Dragon, because we see this new grade 3 double R Heavenly Flight Dragon, Prideful Dragon. And its ability is on a Rearguard Circle, when this unit attacks, if there are 4 more grade 3 rearguards, cost counterblast 1 and soul blast 1, and draw a card. If you persona rotate this turn, you may have this unit get power plus 5k and critical plus 1 until the end of turn, instead of drawing a card. Personally, I don't like this card because Counterblast, a Soul Blast for just a draw, is not really good, and then doing the same, but then only giving 5k and a critical is also not good. Yes, it's still the end of turn, it does synergize with Bastion if you restand it, But still, countless Soul Blast for that, I'm not too much fan on this, if I'm gonna be very honest. And the fact that you need to have 4 or more grade 3 rear guards means you almost need to have an entire field filled with grade 3s. Yes, for Bastion that's not hard to do, but if you don't have those units that can boost, or you have Darkstained Dragon, then you're just wasting cards into the field for almost no apparent reason. So I don't really like this card. That might actually be of a lot of value because it has that crit and it can swing twice with crit, but I'm not too much fan of it. Now for the second card that Cater Sanctuary got, we got a new common grade 2, which is Knight of Heavenly Collapse, Copaldo. And Copaldo has the ability Auto. When this unit is placed on the rearguard circle, from your hand, cost count +1 and rest another rearguard. Reveal the top card of your deck, put it into your hand if it's an order card or grade 3, and call to the rearguard circle if it isn't. So to clarify what that sentence actually means, is basically you reveal the top card, and if it's an order card or a grade 3, you add it to hand, but if it's anything else, you call to the field. Now, this could be nice for Bastion because you're probably gonna add any card to your hand, which is fine, and some of the order cards are also really good, like the new Bastion order card. But it's a grade 2, which is kind of awkward to some extent, so that can already write it out. Now for Hex Orb, this could actually be nice because you know what's on the top of your deck, and if you see a Hex Orb copy, you can use this card to add it to your hand so you have a Persona right target, thus getting your more pluses. But resting your units, I don't know if it's all too great for Hex Orb as well. But this card has been, in my opinion, specifically tailored and built for the new Phantom Blaster deck. Because resting your rearguard doesn't do anything for Phantom Blaster Dragon, because then immediately you're gonna sacrifice that rested unit, thus not wasting on a potential booster or attacker. And adding those grade 3 to your hand, or order cards, I don't know if Phantom Blaster Dragon is gonna use an order in the build, but the grade 3s are very important, because they're gonna be your Persona right, and you want the Persona right every single turn, so you can shove another unit out of the soul, thus getting more resource on the field to then sacrifice for your retire skills. And calling a unit from the top to the field, even if it's a trigger, you don't really mind, because if it's a trigger, you're gonna sacrifice it off with either Blaster Dark or Phantom Blaster Dragon. So this card has been built for that deck, so yeah, that's actually really nice. Now, if we move over to the Wednesday reveals, we see a couple of Dark Stage cards, and these Dark Stage cards, as you probably have read in the title, are some nice cards to level up Baromagnes. Because first off, we've got a new common grade 3, which is Persistent Icicle, Jevinna. And Jevinna has the ability, on a rearguard circle, when this unit attacks a Vanguard, if your soul has 10 or more cards, cost counter +1 and soul +1, and until the end of the battle, when your opponent would call cards from their hand to the Guardian Circle, they must call 2 or more at the same time. Now this, in my opinion, is very specific in the Baromagnes build. You're not really gonna call her to the field in the first couple of attacks, you're probably gonna call her from out of the soul with the extra 10k power. And because you can call her out of the soul, you can probably just run her as attack choices a 1 off or a 2 off, because if you soul charge her, that's great because now you have access to her. And the reason why you want to do that is because she becomes a 23k attacker with the Battle Dory skill. And that's actually really threatening, because with the current guard pool, it's actually really awkward, because it actually means that either your opponent needs to guard with 3 different 5k shields, which honestly isn't that bad for you, because that's our probably grade 1s and grade 2s they wanted to use for their game plan, so you're removing those off their hand. But in probably a lot of situations where you're going to call this out, because you have full control, you're probably going to call this out when you know this is going to happen, they're forced to waste 2 15k shield trigger units, or maybe even a 20k shield trigger unit if they have the new front trigger. The reason why that's the case is because she's 23k. One trigger would actually be enough, but because she has a Battle Dory skill, it forces to another card. They could potentially have just a grade 3 or a grade 2, but if you know their hand is entirely cluttered with triggers, this is another way to just waste a lot more shield potential than would be potentially possible with the grade 1s that become 28k. So this could be a nice finisher for Baromagnes if you know what the situation is and what cards your opponent has in their hand, and you can really screw over their guard potential. And of course, it also negates PGs to some extent. Now, if we go over to the second card for Dark Stage, we see a brand new grade 1 rare card, which is Freeze Breeze. And this card has a nice skill in the likes of Auto Rearguard Circle. When the attack this unit boosted hits, if your Vanguard is Master of Gravity Baromagnes, soul charge 1. And if your soul has 10 or more cards, cost counter +1 and draw 2 cards. Now the on-hit skill is actually pretty nice because it can combo nicely with Selfish Engraver. You can have them in the same column and then suddenly on hit you can soul charge 2, or you can spread them out onto the field, and it means that whatever attack hits, you're gonna get a free soul charge, thus accelerating your soul game plan with Baromagnes. But I'm mostly intrigued about the count +1 draw 2 skill. Baromagnes used a lot of cards from hand to accelerate the soul. All the draws you can get actually worth a lot. And count +1 to draw 2 is a lot of value. So that in itself already justifies this card to be run, in my honest opinion, because this can help you a lot. Yes, it might not soul charge a lot on its own, but those two cards can probably do a lot more than any card on its own could do, because this card could draw that card, it could do a lot, plus another card. So I can definitely see a lot of potential with this card for Baromagnes. Yes, it can only happen on turn 3, and you need to have 10 soul, but we've seen having 10 soul with Baromagnes on the very first grade 3 turn is very doable. Then afterwards, this card can help you to get to that 15 soul, while at the same time also potentially draw into more cards that can help you defend and stall for a bit longer. So I can definitely see potential in this particular grade 1. Now if we move over to the first day reveals, we see Dragon Empire, and first off we see a brand new common grade 3 in the likes of VolcaniolGun Dragon. And this grade 3 has the skill Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit attacks, if your opponent has no front or rear guards, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of the battle. Sadly, this skill is pretty bad. It's just an 18k attacker on a grade 3. It's not really that great, and I find it very disappointing because the artwork of this card is pretty insane. I really like this art, but I'm never gonna use this in any of my Dragon Empire decks. Maybe for a budget build, but it's not good. Now, if we take a look at the second card for Dragon Empire, we see a brand new common grade 2 normal order in the likes of Flame Dragon Bomber. And this order has the ability, choose one of your Vanguards until the end of turn, it gets continuous Vanguard Circle. When all of your units would attack, they may attack your opponent's back row rearguard. So basically all your units can attack the back row. This doesn't mean that your boosters or your units in the back row can then suddenly also attack. No, if they could attack, they now can also attack the back row. Honestly, I'm not too much fan of this card because Dragon Empire is mainly a free attack nation, and wasting one of those free attacks onto a back row unit is very wasteful, especially with something like the Eugene that can just snipe those units in the first place. Yes, there are maybe some cards that have resist and that you now can attack and have pressure. That could be nice, but the only situation where I can see this card being really beneficial is if your opponent got a defensive trigger and your attacks cannot hit, so might as well just attack into their back row. But in most cases, your columns are so big, especially with Overdress, that it doesn't really even matter unless they get the over trigger, and then it's a different story. This card would have been 10 times better if it was given to Stoichea for Magnolia, because Magnolia has 4 to 6 attacks, and they're pretty measurable numbers in most cases. And if your opponent gets a defensive trigger, you don't really mind because you can use all those attacks into their back row units, thus gaining still a lot more value off of your attacks that you generate with Magnolia or any other card that can achieve those multi-attacks. Sadly, this doesn't really apply for Dragon Empire in most cases. That said, it is actually nice support for Dragon Overlord, because Dragon Overlord probably wants to attack into the rear guards to then forcefully activate that restance to get more drive checks and more pressure while also destroying your opponent's resources. And if your opponent has no front row units, you cannot really capitalize on that ability. With this order, that's completely now a non-issue, because now you can also attack into their boosters with Dragon Overlord, thus still getting value of that potential forceful continuous effect where your opponent cannot guard for the rear guards, which gives the deck some more options. But besides that, I don't really see a lot of potential in this particular order card. Now, if we go over to the last day of the week, which is Friday, we see new cards for Stoichea. And first off, we see this brand new double R grade 1 Deep Emotion Maiden Urjula. Now, of course, some might already know about this card because this card was leaked with a magazine screenshot last week, but I didn't cover it then because it wasn't an official reveal, and now it's revealed this week, so we're covering it right now. Now, this grade 1 has 2 abilities, from which one of them is continuous rearguard circle. When you would exchange or move rearguards during the main phase, you may also move them along rows. What it basically means is that now you can move your units all over the place without any restrictions as long as this card is on the rearguard circle. The only reason why this can help is that it can potentially fix awkward boards because you need to superior call units from the top of your deck with your right line. In the early game you can just slam into the front row, to the columns, and then just attack. But once you go into Magnolia, you cannot really make full 6 attacks. You can rearrange these units to maybe get better positioning and better columns. What this also allows you to do is capitalize on specific units that have restrictions to where they can be called. A good example is the new grade 1 of the Festival collection. It can only be called behind your Vanguard. You can call it now behind your Vanguard, and with this grade 1 can move it to another circle to then make room for a new unit behind your Vanguard, or maybe another copy from your hand so you can call another one to the field. But besides those specific interactions, there aren't really anything to benefit of this particular skill. Now, she also has a secondary effect, which is continuous or rearguard circle. Your units in front of this unit cannot be chosen by your opponent's effect. So you give resist to a unit in the same column in front of it. Now, it's not the greatest because yes, it cannot be retired by unit skill, but they can still attack into it because it's not protected. If it was at the very least to the entire column, then you could put this in the front and that means it cannot attack into that particular unit. But then you still have the issue that she herself isn't protected. So if you're up against a clan that can just snipe twice in the main phase, or have two singular ways to snipe something, they can first remove her and then remove the unit that had her protection because that protection is now gone. A good example is Eugene. He can easily navigate through this restriction because he has multiple ways to retire units with different skills. I don't really like this card at all. There isn't really anything to capitalize on the skill unless we get more cards that have very specific restrictions to where they are called, so you have more applications and more beneficial effects of running this particular grade 1. But so far, it doesn't really exist in Stoicheia. Now for the second card for Stoicheia, we've got a brand new common grade 2 normal order in the likes of Fruitful Season. And this normal order has the ability, until the end of turn, all of your back row rearguards get power plus 5k. You cannot move rearguards to other rearguard circle and they cannot boost. The restriction might sound harsh, but actually this is really good for Magnolia because if you go in this final turn situation or you can achieve 6 attacks with that new grade 2, you are going to need this order card because with the 5k power that you give to this unit and the 5k power of this, suddenly all your attacks can hit over defensive triggers because all your back row units already gain an additional amount of power. The best example here is the grade 1 of the right line. It becomes a 13k attacker when it attacks from the back row. Now with the 5k of Magnolia, it becomes 18k. Still doesn't hit over defensive trigger. With this grade 2, it now suddenly becomes 23 and it hits perfect magic numbers. Not to mention, you have the grade 2, which gain an additional 10k power. On top of that, we have other units that gain even more power. Now, with this order, suddenly you're gonna hit over magic numbers all across the board, and now defensive triggers don't really mean a lot, unless, of course, your opponent hits 2. But that's a different story. So overall, I like this order card a lot. It's definitely for Magnolia, not really for Zorga. But then again, it's great for Magnolia. And I can definitely see this helping the deck a lot because it really needs all the help it can get. And that also concludes this weekly wrap up for all the reveals that we saw for the Card of the Day reveals. Overall, the reveals were pretty interesting. We saw a lot of new cards for specific builds, like the one for Orfist or for Baromagnes, as well as new tools for Overlord and Untitled Dragon. But we see also these small little support ways for something like Magnolia that can help them to capitalize more on the issues that they had with the previous iterations of their builds. But that said, I'm very curious of what you think of these new cards, which cards you're very excited for your particular decks. Let me know in the comments down below what's your favorite card from these week's reveals, as there are a lot of interesting cards and there's something for any player out there. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely Patreons over at patreon.com/VolcaniolGun. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VolcaniolGun and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!